On today's World Insight, just hours left before the U.S. and China sign the trade deal. Will both sides leave the table a winner? And the Russian government resigns shortly after Putin made his annual address. How will Russia tackle its many challenges while a new government is formed? And here's our host, Tian Wei.
Hello and welcome to World Insight. I'm Tian Wei. The program is coming to you live from Beijing. Let's begin today's show in Washington, where China and the U.S. are poised to sign a Phase 1 trade agreement after nearly 2 years of negotiations. Chinese Vice Premier and Chief Negotiator Liu He is scheduled to sign the deal with U.S. President Donald Trump in a few hours, Thursday, Beijing time. Before we get down to a discussion involving the two sides about what's likely to be the result, let's take a look at the latest from the other side of the Pacific.
Just hours to go until the official signing of the Phase 1 deal. According to the Chinese Ministry of Commerce, the deal includes 9 segments covering protection of intellectual property and technology transfer. The ministry also said the two sides reached consensus on the protection of business secrets and law enforcement against fake products. While in Washington, Chinese Vice Premier Liu He has been meeting key economic and business figures. They include IMF Managing Director Kristalina Georgieva. The meeting also included leaders of the U.S. China Business Council, which forms a key economic bridge between the two countries. As the Chinese delegation arrived in Washington for the signing ceremony, the Trump administration removed China from its list of currency manipulators, a label that China disputed and the International Monetary Fund did not support.
These tariffs will stay in place until there's a Phase 2. If the president gets a Phase 2 quickly, he'll consider releasing tariffs as part of Phase 2. If not, there won't be any tariff relief. So it has nothing to do with the election or anything else. There's no secret agreements.
Many are looking to see if the upcoming deal will serve as an economic roadmap for a more comprehensive Phase 2 deal.
For more on the U.S. China trade agreement in Washington, we are joined by William Li, Chief Economist at the Milken Institute. In Hong Kong, Xiao Geng, Professor at the Peking University HSBC Business School. In our Beijing studio, Liu Baocheng from the University of International Business and Economics. Gentlemen, welcome to our program. Mr. Li, what can we expect from the Phase 1 deal? Not many details revealed yet by either side.
What we can expect is to see the beginnings of a great process where two countries with very different political and economic systems are forging a framework that will serve them for the 21st century, especially as these two systems develop a way of trading with each other and developing each other economically.
One of the things, Professor Xiao, is whether this is going to prevent further escalation of tariffs against one another. Do you think it can be sufficient?
Well, this is a very important step because we have so much escalations on the negative side, and this is the first time we have something substantial and positive, and that will give enough momentum. And also, I think very important is the mutual understanding after so many debates and escalations on the negative sides. So both sides realize that fighting is actually bad for both sides.
How long will they realize this? The question really is, how long will that momentum last, Professor Liu?
Well, it's been 23 months since the first start of the trade war, and
17 months into the negotiations, of course.
Right, but there has been a lot of emotional crossfires, and finally the rational engagement becomes the key. So definitely there are going to be further grudges, there's going to be further even confrontations along the way, because the two economies are so much interdependent and different in terms of institution and infrastructure.
All right, and Mr. Li, of course, I would like to also pose that question to the other gentleman as well. phase 2 is the thing people already talk about before the phase 1 is being signed. But, you know, phase 2, of course, we all know it's going to be even more difficult. Some would even argue it cannot be achieved by 2 parties alone, but rather by involving multi-party stakeholders. Mr. Li, your take here, will phase 1 necessarily lead to phase 2 in the election year?
We have to remember that phase 1 represents the harvesting of all the fruits of the discussions that we've had so far, and phase 2 will require yet further discussions where both countries are going to have to adapt their economic systems so that intellectual property laws and enforcement mechanisms can be agreed upon and made effective between the 2 countries. China's not had a history of a lot of legal practices that back up this kind of law and show us how it will be enacted. U.S. is trying to negotiate how the Western model might be applicable. So we have a big set of structural changes, both legally and economically and politically within both countries for phase 2 to really come about. So I expect that to be a long discussion and not done in one document. It's going to take many documents where every facet will be discussed separately.
You use one finger, not one document, but more than that. Professor Liu, your thought?
I think, well, there's going to be quite some sort of overlap between phase 1 and phase 2, and the implementation, the quality of implementation of phase 1 is, I think, is a part of the discussion for phase 2. Of course, phase 2 can go further, deeper into industrial subsidies, into very practically how the U.S. can really roll back on the tariff that is still over there. And of course, the intellectual property would be also a bone of contention. And that involved a lot more complications, so therefore I believe this is going to take far longer period of time for both parties to really see eye to eye on certain issues.
And Professor Xiao, that has a lot to do with whether both parties think they are the winners in this so-called phase 1, leading up, if there is any phase 2, isn't it, Professor Xiao?
Well, I think phase 1 definitely both sides wins, and also phase 2, you know, if completed, will be win for both sides. But phase 2 will depends on politics on both countries, particularly on the U.S. side, because this is, you know, the win-win is clear, but the timing depends on the politics.
Depends on the politics. Agricultural products, a lot of politics involved, isn't it, Mr. Li, particularly in the election season. So how much do you think phase 1, in a way, is dealing with agricultural products? And also, there is a quota, as we know, coming from news leaking out about phase 1, even though we do not know the exact number. So how much, when China is committed to buy agricultural products from the U.S. market, which could also help China to make sure its economy goes smoothly in terms of agricultural needs, what is that likely to be the balance? Will this deal be able to address that, or this is more dealing with politics, Mr. Li?
The implementation of the agricultural component of phase 1 is critical because it shows how the 2 sides will cooperate. Everyone is criticizing the opacity and the secrecy behind the details, but let's not forget commodity markets are very volatile and subject to a lot of runs and price dynamics that they want to eliminate by keeping the details of the trade deal secret for now and letting the market determine how the implementation will take place. Both China and the U.S. need agriculture. China has had a swine pig problem for quite a while now, so it's not clear that enough pigs to eat all the corn that the U.S. wants to export. But we can change the quality of exports and focus more on agricultural products and also shift into industrial products. So the phase 1 is a very complex mechanism where focusing just on agriculture, I think, misguides the viewer into what is really important about phase 1. Phase 1 is about implementation and developing trust between the 2 countries.
Developing trust is extremely important. Now, we always know, Professor Xiao, in many discussions about China-U.S., there is a deficit of trust from the very beginning. Now, recently, it didn't help, at least over the past 2 to 3 years. Professor Xiao, do you think phase 1, as a result of the negotiation process, there are certain kinds of mechanism that can be set up? It is also being believed that in phase 1 deal, there's something like an implementation mechanism being set up between China and the United States. Now, I don't want to speculate, but do you think there can be more ground for certain kinds of mechanism?
Well, I think so. You know, after the negotiation on the first phase, you know, both sides actually now know much better about each side's strengths and the weakness. And on the Chinese side, China has tremendous purchasing power, both in agriculture and also in manufacture, other aspects. And in terms of enforcement, well, China has different institutions, but China is moving towards a more international, more open, and you know, so it's actually consistent with the trade deal. You know, all the reforms China is doing. You know, so I think there's a great chance that the enforcement part is actually will go through well.
When all of you are talking about the implementation, I'm both excited and concerned in a way. I'm nervous, shall I say? Maybe that's a better word. Whether we're going to do this well, because it's not just about China-U.S. economies, it's about the world economy at large, gentlemen, that we're talking about here. Having said that, though, Professor Liu, we noticed two sides who signed it. From the U.S. side, it's going to be the U.S. president, at least according to the latest information. We don't know whether he's going to change his mind or not. Secondly, we're going to have the vice premier coming from China. He's the chief trade negotiator from the Chinese side, Mr. Liu He. So how should we see the significance of these two signing the agreement? After all, Mr. Liu was involved in this negotiation process from day one.
Well, diplomatically, you see that well, they are in different positions. So, however, it is really the common interest that bring them together on this particular deal for signature. And I think this is really quite a level of sincerity that the importance is really attached to this. And of course, you know, Trump wanted to take the occasion to show that how he has delivered to the United States, and for China, it's really a practical reaction, and so China wants really to settle the dust because most part of it is still also in line with Chinese strategic goal. So it's really a done deal, and that gave a lot more confidence to the business community also.
I see. Mr. Li, now I want to ask you about the specific question, whether we are going to see President Trump being politically profitable coming from the deal. He's been praising the deal as large and comprehensive, and his words, a big, beautiful monster. I don't know how to interpret this. Maybe you have better English knowledge than me. So, Mr. Li, help us to understand.
I think the beautiful monster is that it's such a big deal and it's such a big accomplishment, and it belies all of the critics that say that it's really nothing. So I think that, and the importance that President Trump attaches to it is that he himself is putting his own signature and his own political capital on it, and so it does help him. But let's not forget, it also helps President Xi in China, because we now have the first step of a process where President Trump has promised to go to China and speak with President Xi about how to develop a framework for phase 2 with intellectual property and state subsidies, and again, mixing together the two very diverse economic and political systems that we have between China and the U.S. to forge this new framework for the 21st century.
I have to come back to you, Professor Xiao. In Mar-a-Lago, 4 kinds of mechanisms have been agreed by both presidents from both countries. Now, we do not have any of those mechanisms being active right now, only a trade negotiation mechanism that has been functioning for the phase 1. So are we going to see with, let's just say, the ambience created by phase 1, the other 3 at least up and running?
Well, I think with this good start, a lot of things will follow, and I think particularly on the Chinese side, the economy actually has been slowing for the last few years, but now turning point comes. And on the U.S. side, because the stimulus has been for the last few years, so it has to actually do something to solve the trade problems. Otherwise, at the peak with its economy, you know, if they don't do anything, the market will be affected.
It's only the market, Mr. Li. Will the other 3 mechanisms up and running, or not a whole?
The 3 mechanisms are just templates for what the actual mechanisms will be given the practice of implementing phase one. So let's not lock things in stone because the process is very fluid as we've seen over the last 2 years. So I think we need to wait and see how implementation will shape this new framework and how experience will tell us how to change things. As Premier Dong said, right, cross the river slowly and touching every stone beneath the waters.
Well, it seems that the current affairs are always touch our consistency. However, all of the process is really testing our patience. I want to thank the three of you on this big day, shall I say, for your insights and contribution. William Li, Xiaogang, Liu Baocheng, I'm sure we're going to gather together once again to talk about U.S. China trade and beyond. Really appreciate it. At least we should say congratulations for the phase one to be signed.